They were live streaming again, Nina with her polished voice and perfectly angled camera, capturing the warm glow of sunset over the cedar deck. "Welcome to our coastal sanctuary," she said sweetly, gesturing behind her. "And this," she paused for just a second, turning slightly toward me, "this is Lillian. She used to help my mom when I was little. She's kind of like a longtime helper of the family." I didn't flinch. Not at first. I just stood there, holding the tray of lemon water I had prepared, standing in the doorway of the cottage I had spent years building, alone, after my divorce, after the silence, after the ache of being erased piece by piece. The camera never panned my way. Nina's followers flooded the comment section with hearts and compliments and questions about the vintage cabinetry. None of them asked who I was. No one noticed the woman holding the drinks. I watched David standing just off to the side, arms crossed. Quiet, he didn't correct her. He didn't say Mom. He didn't say anything. Behind him, Rose danced barefoot across the deck, her little feet landing in all the soft spots I had once reinforced with my own hands. "Grandma Gloria said this house has magic," she chirped. "She said this is where we're going to do family Christmas from now on." Her voice carried like wind chimes in the salty air. My breath caught. I stood still. Invisible but not quite gone, Nina continued, her pitch glossy, elegant, full of warmth that never turned toward me. That night, I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just went back inside, placed the untouched tray on the counter, sat in the chair by the window, and stared at the place where their laughter had once filled the walls. That's when I knew not that I didn't belong, but that I had never truly been invited. I wasn't called the wrong name. I was just handed the wrong role and told to smile for the camera. The first time David called me Mom, he had peanut butter on his cheek and a toy fire truck clutched in his hand. He was 4. Gloria had dropped him off at the courthouse like he was a forgotten lunch bag. No hug, no note, just a quick signature and the slam of a car door. Back then, I was only Jeff's new wife, unsure of how to braid a toddler's hair or soothe midnight sobs. But David didn't cry much, not loudly. He had this way of curling into silence like it was safer than asking for anything. I remember how he used to trail behind me like a shadow, quiet, cautious, waiting, and I just started leaving the bathroom door open, pulling up a second chair at the dinner table, learning how to cut sandwiches diagonally because that made him eat. I didn't plan to fall into motherhood, it just happened, moment by moment, like snow accumulating overnight while no one's looking. There were nights when he'd wake up from a nightmare, trembling, and crawl under my quilt, not saying a word, just pressing his small fingers into my arm, like if he held tight enough, he could stop the world from moving. One time he got sick, high fever, delirious, whispering strange things. I stayed up for 2 nights, sponging his forehead, coaxing spoonfuls of broth past cracked lips. Jeff never noticed. He said, "Kids get sick. He'll bounce back." But I didn't care about bouncing. I cared about the small, fragile boy who gripped my sleeve and whispered, "Don't go to sleep, Mom. I might disappear." And that's when it stuck. Mom. It was whispered, unsure, but it stayed. I still have the crayon drawing he made a year later, a crooked house. 2 stick figures, one big, one small, and the words "Me and Mom" scrawled beneath it. I kept it taped to the inside of my closet for years, like a secret only I was allowed to believe. We built things together. Not just puzzles or toy planes, but a life. When he turned 9, I taught him how to plant marigolds. When he turned 13, I let him repaint his room navy blue and didn't even mind the splotches on the carpet. He called me from college orientation because he couldn't find the dorm laundry room. He called me the day he proposed to Nina. Every milestone, every crack in the road, he reached for me, never once for Gloria. She had become a vague shadow, someone who sent birthday texts and called herself the real mother, but never showed up for flu season or algebra homework. I was the one who remembered he hated olives. I was the one who drove 5 hours in a snowstorm when his car broke down. I was the one who stayed when staying didn't look like a grand gesture but just folding socks and paying late-night pizza bills. After Jeff and I divorced, I didn't fight for anything except this house, the old cottage by the sea. It was crumbling, cold, and soaked in drafty silence. But it had good bones, and more importantly, it was mine. I sanded the floors with blistered hands, painted the porch a muted yellow, retiled the kitchen in spring green. David helped. Sometimes when he could get away from work or from Nina's plans. He said the place felt like childhood, like peanut butter and marigolds and safety. He said, "You've built this whole thing with nothing but patience and paint." "Mom," I laughed, but part of me wanted to cry, because he saw it. Then, he saw me. When they moved into the city and had Rose, I kept the guest room ready, stocked with children's books and a quilt I stitched from David's old t-shirts. They never stayed the night, but I kept it ready. Always. That's what mothers do. Even when no one calls, they still leave the porch light on. I remember Rose's first visit. She was 3. She saw the rocking chair and asked, "Did my daddy sleep here?" I smiled and said, "Sometimes, when he was very little and afraid of thunderstorms." She ran her fingers along the window frame. "Grandma Gloria says this house is too old." I just nodded, because the truth was, so was I. Too old to compete, too old to beg for recognition, too old to prove what should have been self-evident, but not too old to remember. Not too old to still feel every invisible thread that had once tied me to that boy with the fire truck, and not too old to feel it slowly unravel every time someone said, "This is Nina's mother-in-law," or worse, nothing at all. You don't stop being a mother just because the role gets handed to someone flashier, someone with better lighting and a louder voice. No, you just learn how to mother yourself. In the silence that follows, I wasn't the birth mother. I was just the one who stayed when no one else wanted to. The first winter after Jeff left, the pipes froze and burst in the upstairs bathroom. I didn't have money for a plumber, so I watched YouTube videos on my old laptop with a cracked screen, learning how to shut off the valve, how to thaw the lines with a hairdryer, how to rebuild something no one else thought was worth saving. I wore 3 layers of sweaters inside the cottage that year, slept with socks on, and boiled water in a kettle just to wash my face. David came by once, unannounced, with takeout and a toolbox. "Mom, this place needs work," he said, looking around like it was the first time he truly saw the peeling paint and the stubborn draft that came from the west wall. But he didn't see the framed drawing still tucked beside the pantry, the one he made when he was 5. He didn't see the corners of the kitchen floor I had scrubbed on my knees until my hands bled. "I'll help you fix it up," he added. And for a while, he came on weekends. We painted baseboards, laughed at how the cottage creaked like an old woman whispering secrets. I made cinnamon rolls. He brought lumber. And for those brief hours, it felt like family again, not blood, but the kind that forms when 2 people survive storms together. Nina wasn't fond of the cottage. "Too rustic," she said once, after tripping on the uneven threshold. She didn't like the antique kettle that whistled too loudly or the way the porch lights flickered during rain. "It's charming in a kind of old lady way," she added, wrapping her coat tighter. I pretended not to hear it, pretended I didn't notice how she always turned down invitations to stay overnight. But David came. At least then, he did. When they got married, I offered the cottage as a weekend retreat. "Come rest here. It's quiet, peaceful," I told them. They nodded, politely, but never came. Still, I made little preparations, hung lace curtains in the guest room, placed lavender sachets in the drawer, left a note in Nina's favorite font that said, "Welcome home." It remained unopened. At Rose's birth, I crocheted a blanket out of leftover yarn, sunflower yellow and sky blue, colors David used to wear as a child. I mailed it to the hospital because I wasn't invited to the delivery. A week later, a photo arrived, Rose swaddled in soft pink, wrapped in someone else's gift. Mine never appeared in any picture. I didn't ask. I never asked. That's the thing about women like me, we know how to carry absence without making it heavy for others. But one day, Rose visited the cottage with David. She was barely walking, toddling through the herb garden I'd planted behind the house. "What's this, Grandma?" she asked, pointing at the mint. I smiled. "That's for tea. You crush the leaves gently, like this." Her eyes widened at the scent. "It smells like gum," I laughed, and in that moment, everything softened. For an hour, I was just Grandma. No footnotes, no clarifications. We painted shells, dipped brushes into sea blue watercolors, and she told me she wanted to live in a house with purple windows someday. David watched quietly, sipping coffee on the porch. When it was time to leave, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for the mint gum house." My throat closed, and I couldn't speak. I just waved, standing on the path until their car disappeared down the hill. That night, I sat by the fire, the same chair I always used, knitting half a scarf I'd never finish, and I wondered, how many thankless kindnesses make a mother? Is it in the biology, the birthdays, the hospital forms? Or is it in the 1,000 quiet acts the soup made without being asked, the doors kept unlocked, the tea brewed at exactly the right strength I kept every crayon she left behind, every sticky note David once wrote, even the scribbled grocery lists from when he was 10 and insisted we needed more ice cream and batteries and maybe a spaceship? I have those scraps tucked in a box labeled important. Not because anyone else would think they matter, but because they are the proof that I was here, that I loved, that I mothered. Once, during a summer storm, lightning knocked out the power. David and I sat by candlelight, playing cards, while rain pounded the roof. "You always keep things running," he said, motioning to the candle, the dry towels, the emergency flashlight. "You're like the engine no one sees. But if it stopped, everything would collapse." I smiled then, but now, that sentence lives in my chest like a forgotten promise, because the engine did stop, and no one noticed. But I remember every time he asked for a second helping of soup, every sock I mended, every night I stayed up because the world had gotten too loud and he needed a quiet place to land. I remember being called Mom, not for what I did, but for who I was in the moments no one else stepped up. And I remember how it slowly vanished like mist when someone else returned and decided to reclaim what I had built. But before that, before the silence, I was everything. I wasn't written into his bloodline. I was just the breath behind every soft bedtime goodnight. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. David was in the kitchen, speaker on, stirring pasta with one hand, laughing with the other, and I was just passing through, wiping down the hallway shelf like I always did when I couldn't sit still. "She's back," he said, and I paused. "She wants to meet Rose." A pause. Then his voice dropped lower. "No, Nina, I don't think it's a bad idea. She's still her grandmother. Technically." I didn't breathe. Just stood there, cloth in hand, listening to that word echo technically, like I was a placeholder for something that had been misplaced and was now being found again. Gloria. I hadn't heard that name spoken in our house in over 2 decades. She had vanished when David was barely walking, walked out of Jeff's life like a ghost no one mourned. And yet, here she was, reaching back through time like a hook to reclaim what she had forfeited. The first time I saw her again, she wore red lipstick and called herself Grandma Glow. Rose ran to her like she was candy in a wrapper, bright, sweet, and instantly adored. I stood behind the counter, pouring lemonade into glasses, and watched them hug. Gloria had the kind of voice that filled a room, the kind that made people turn their heads, even when she had nothing to say. "Oh, look at you," she cried, cupping Rose's cheeks like they were pearls. You've got my nose, don't you? David smiled awkward, unsure, and Nina snapped photos from the side, the light catching them just right, like it had all been arranged. Maybe it had. Maybe I was the only one who didn't get the memo. That night, when they left, I stayed behind to clean. There was a lipstick mark on one of the guest cups, and I stared at it for a long time before scrubbing it off. It came off easily, as if it had never been there, but I felt it anyway. Things changed quickly after that. Gloria started coming more often, always announced, always welcomed. Nina liked her. She brings great gifts, she said once, admiring the French doll Gloria had given Rose, and stories, real ones, from the old country, as if I had never told stories of my own, as if bedtime tales about the sea and the salt and the cottage itself had never mattered. Slowly, I noticed things. The family calendar moved from my fridge to Nina's phone. The Christmas dinner I had hosted for 15 years was suddenly being reimagined at Gloria's townhouse. And one day, Rose asked, "Grandma, are you my daddy's stepmom or real mom?" The question was innocent. The answer shattered something inside me. I said nothing, just smiled, because I didn't know how to explain that sometimes the realest love has no label, just layers of silence. A week later, a framed photo appeared on Nina's Instagram. David, Nina, Rose, and Gloria. 4 people, 4 smiles, 4 hands holding each other across a checkered picnic blanket. No mention of who took the photo, no tag, no trace that I had stood 5 feet away, holding the container of homemade lemonade. The caption said, 3 generations of love. I stared at it until the words blurred. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked around the cottage, touching the door frames, the picture hooks, the corners where David had once hidden his Halloween candy. It was all still there, memories etched into paint and wood, but somehow I was no longer part of the narrative. I had become the caretaker of a museum no one toured anymore. They came, they smiled, they posted, and then they left. No one asked me how I got the roof fixed after the last storm. No one remembered that I refinished the deck myself with a borrowed sander and a sprained wrist. Gloria was glamorous, magnetic, the kind of woman who made people believe in fairy tales despite the fact that she had vanished from her son's life for decades. But now, with a grandchild on her lap and stories dripping from her lips like honey, she was rewriting history in real time. David let her. Maybe he needed something to fill the hollow Jeff left behind. Maybe Nina liked the aesthetic of it all. Maybe it was easier to welcome back the ghost than to acknowledge the woman who never stopped being there. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and found Rose drawing at the coffee table. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing at the page. "This is Mommy, Daddy, me, and Grandma Glow," she beamed. "Where's me?" I asked, gently. She blinked, puzzled. "You're the one who makes cookies. You don't go in the picture." I nodded, walked to the sink, and started washing dishes that weren't dirty. It was easier than crying. I scrubbed and scrubbed, until my hands hurt. I wasn't removed from their world. I was just gradually left out until my name didn't fit into the caption anymore. It was supposed to be a soft launch, a family-centered live stream to promote Nina's latest real estate project, a luxury seaside retreat curated for generational harmony, as she called it. I had prepared the refreshments, as always, brewed the tea from herbs I grew myself, arranged lemon slices into perfect fans, tucked sprigs of rosemary into the napkins, just for that touch of old-world charm. David had asked if I minded them filming at the cottage. "It's just for the vibe," he said, kissing my forehead like he still remembered I was the one who taught him how to wash behind his ears. I said yes. Of course I did. I always said yes. The camera crew arrived mid-morning. Nina floated through the rooms in a pale linen dress, her voice trained, soft-edged but crisp, like an actress reading lines she'd written herself. David hovered behind her, smiling where appropriate. And me, I stayed mostly off camera. Nina had asked gently, "Do you mind just helping in the background? It'll be more authentic." I didn't ask what she meant by authentic. I didn't ask anything. Just tied on my apron and got to work, as I had for over 3 decades. The stream began with shots of the exterior, the sea breeze rustling through the cedar shingles, the soft crunch of gravel on the path I had laid stone by stone. Then came the kitchen, the heart of the home, Nina said, and gestured behind her with a graceful flick of her hand. This house was lovingly restored, she explained to the thousands watching live, by a dear friend of the family, Lillian. She's sort of like a housekeeper who's been with us forever, practically part of the furniture. I heard it, every word, every syllable like a drop of acid. I didn't freeze, not exactly. My body kept moving, pouring tea, setting the tray down, but something inside me stopped, just stopped. Housekeeper, part of the furniture. I waited, just for a beat, to hear David say something, anything. But he didn't. He adjusted a curtain. He nodded. He let it hang there like truth. And the comments poured in. "She's so sweet, can we hire her?" Love the vibe, old world meets luxury. I wasn't real. I was a vibe, a backdrop, a nameless presence in someone else's show. I watched Nina tilt her head and smile at the camera, her hand resting on Gloria's shoulder. "We believe homes should carry stories," she said, "and ours has so much history, thanks to Grandma Glow." Grandma Glow. That's when Rose skipped into frame and announced, "This is Grandma Glow's house now, Daddy said so." They all laughed. Even David. I felt my throat burn. But I couldn't leave, not while the kettle was still hot. Not while the camera might catch me walking out of frame. So I smiled. I smiled like my name had never existed in that house. When the shoot ended, everyone clapped. Nina offered champagne. David handed out thank yous like polite candy. I slipped away, went to the back porch, sat on the wooden bench David and I once stained together. My hands trembled, but I kept them folded. I didn't cry. Not until later, when the video went viral. Not until friends started messaging. "Saw you in that coastal home ad. You're famous now. Miss Lillian." One said, "Are you really their housekeeper?" I didn't respond, just turned my phone face down and left it there. Days passed. The video racked up views. Comments flooded in. Gloria was praised for her style, her warmth, her timeless elegance. Nina got brand inquiries, speaking offers, and me, I wasn't mentioned, except one comment. One line that slipped through the glossy praise. It read, "Is that woman in the apron their mother? She looks like she belongs." But they didn't say her name. That one I read again and again, until the words etched into my chest like glass. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun went down. The rosemary sprigs had dried. The tea was cold. I stared at my hands, these hands that had braided David's hair when he was small, that had scrubbed this floor after his fevers, that had learned to fix a jammed window, cook 1,000 meals, carry everything without asking for credit. These hands didn't belong to a housekeeper. They belonged to a mother, but no one remembered. No one said it out loud. No one stopped the camera and pointed to me and said, "This is her house. This is her story." They just filmed over me, edited me out with a smile, sold my silence like it was part of the design. I wasn't erased with cruelty. I was repackaged with charm until I couldn't recognize myself in the home I had built. That night, after the house had emptied of voices and footsteps and all the artificial warmth they'd tried to leave behind, I walked into the living room and stood in front of the mantel where the family photo had always lived. David in the middle, Rose on his lap, Nina on one side, and me on the other, just slightly turned in, smiling like I still believed I belonged there. I reached up with both hands and took the frame down slowly, as if it might shatter from memory alone. The wall behind it had faded around the edges, a soft imprint of time and dust that said she was here. I didn't cry. I didn't whisper goodbye. I wrapped the frame in an old tea towel, the one with blue stripes he used to drape over his shoulder while pretending to be a chef when he was 8, and I slid it into the bottom drawer of the old buffet no one ever opened anymore. I didn't know what to do with the space left behind, so I lit a candle, something small, steady, the kind of flame you don't notice at first, but that never forgets to burn. In the kitchen, the mugs from the live stream were still drying on the rack. I took the one Gloria used, the one Nina had chosen with gold trim and called camera-worthy, and placed it back in the cupboard without a sound. My movements were quiet, measured, like every action needed to be folded in on itself. I opened the pantry and counted the cans. I watered the mint plant, even though the leaves had started to brown. I rearranged the chairs around the table, straightening them into perfect lines. I was trying, I think, to make the room forget them before I could. Later, I sat at the edge of my bed and looked around. There were no photographs of me and David anymore. They'd slowly been replaced over the years, first with pictures of Rose, then with polite holiday cards, and then nothing at all. I opened my nightstand and pulled out a small box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a folded note in David's handwriting from when he was 12. "Sorry I broke the lamp. Mom, I'll pay you back when I'm rich." There was no money in the box. Of course, just that note. A paper anchor from a time when being his mother didn't need a caption. I put the note back, carefully, then closed the drawer. Outside, the sea wind howled against the glass, like it wanted to come in and sit with me, keep me company in the spaces they'd left behind. I didn't answer it. I didn't answer anything. The next morning, I woke before the sun, made coffee the way I always did, 2 scoops. Slow pour, silence. I took a walk down to the shoreline, wearing the same boots I'd worn since David left for college. Soles worn thin but still holding. The tide was low, the air salted and cold. I didn't cry there either. I just stood still, letting the wind tangle my hair, letting the silence wrap around me like a shawl no one else could see. When I came back, I began packing. I began, not to leave, but to reclaim. I boxed up the tea sets Nina liked to borrow for photo shoots. I folded the embroidered tablecloth Gloria had once complimented. It's quaint, in a grandmotherly way. I took the guest towels, the throw pillows, the tiny glass vases with dried flowers, and I put them away. Not because I was erasing them, but because I was finally making room for myself. I cleaned out the guest room too. Removed the crib that Rose had long outgrown, but Nina insisted I keep just in case. There was no just in case. Not anymore. I vacuumed the corners. I opened the window. Let the air in. Let the old breath of this house speak again without needing approval. That night, I made soup for one. I lit the candle again, placed it where the photo used to sit. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my phone. I just sat in the quiet, spoon in hand, tasting every bite like it was a question I was learning how to answer. The next day, I wrote 2 names on a sheet of paper, David and Nina, and then drew a line through both, not out of anger, out of clarity, out of the soft, aching realization that if I didn't draw that line, they would never stop crossing it. Then I folded that paper, lit a match, and let it burn in the kitchen sink. No tears, no curses, just ash, just space, just silence that finally belonged to me. I wasn't abandoned. I was overwritten until I pressed delete with both hands and whispered nothing at all. It was while cleaning out the linen closet that I found it again, folded into the yellowing pages of an old gardening magazine, the letter David had written to me when he was 14, in his slanted, uneven cursive, the kind that tried so hard to look grown up but still curled like a child's. I hadn't been looking for it. I was just rearranging towels, clearing shelves no one else touched, when it slid out and fluttered to the floor like something too gentle to land loudly. I bent down, picked it up with fingers that suddenly trembled, and for a moment, I didn't move. The cottage was quiet, the kind of still that only comes after you've stopped expecting anyone to call your name. I opened the letter slowly, like it might break. The ink had faded slightly, but I knew the words by heart. Mom, Lil, I don't say thank you enough. I know I'm weird sometimes, and that I roll my eyes and forget to put dishes away. But I want you to know that when you sing in the kitchen, I feel safe. When you wait up for me even though I'm late, I feel seen. I don't tell you this stuff because I'm 14 and it's not cool. But I see you. I see everything. Love, David. I read it once, twice, a third time, just to prove to myself that it had been real. That once before Gloria came back, before Nina's world of clean lines and digital perfection, there had been this boy who called me Mom Lil and meant every syllable. I sat on the floor and held that letter like it was a lifeline, like it could rewind time and place me back in the kitchen where I sang badly over the sound of boiling pasta, while David scribbled math problems and groaned about gym class. He was always late coming home back then, missing the bus on purpose just to walk the longer way, watching clouds, listening to music on the cheap MP3 player we saved up for together. I remember the day he left this note on my pillow. He didn't say anything about it, just walked past me that morning with his usual half-mumbled morning and a mouthful of cereal. But when I made the bed later, there it was, folded neatly with my name written on the outside in block letters. I didn't say anything either. I just made his favorite dinner that night, lasagna with too much cheese, and he grinned like he knew I'd seen it. That was how we talked, sometimes, in food, in notes, in small, steady gestures that meant everything even if no one else saw them. I traced the last line of the letter again. I see you, and felt the breath catch in my chest. Because now, no one did. Now, I was the woman who handed out lemonade, who folded napkins, who stepped out of frame so the lighting hit Gloria just right. But once, I was the person he wrote to in the dark, the one whose voice made thunderstorms feel less threatening, whose arms were the first he reached for when he failed his spelling test, or bruised his shin, or simply had a bad day. I stood up, slowly, the letter still in my hand, walked to my bedroom, opened the old jewelry box I hadn't used in years, nestled it in with the brooch he gave me in 8th grade, the tiny paper rose he made in 2nd, the grocery list from his high school camping trip where he forgot to write tent, but remembered marshmallows twice. I closed the lid gently, as if sealing a time capsule no one else would understand. Then I whispered into the empty room, I saw you too, David. Every day, I wasn't the mother by blood. I was the witness by heart, and sometimes, that's the only kind that remembers the sound of your laughter when the world forgets your name. The morning I decided to take it all back, the sky was a pale sheet of gray, stretched thin like breath before a storm quiet, unremarkable, the kind of day no one remembers unless something breaks. I brewed my coffee without sugar, let the toast burn a little too long, then dressed in silence, choosing the navy coat with the stitched inner pocket, the one I wore when I signed the cottage deed into my name. Alone. After Jeff walked out. I didn't bring the letter. I didn't bring anything sentimental. Just my ID, my bank folder, and the deed papers tucked flat in an envelope that had once held David's birth certificate. Ironic now, maybe, that the same paper that marked the beginning of my motherhood would also carry the end. The law office smelled of pine-scented air freshener and quiet judgment. A young receptionist glanced up and offered a brittle smile. Appointment, she asked. Name Lillian Cross. I said, I wanted to say more. I wanted to say, I'm the woman who saved her son from fevers and loneliness and cold winters without complaint. I'm the woman who stitched love into curtains and second-hand sweaters. But I said nothing else. I just sat down and waited for my name to be called like a number at a deli counter. When the attorney stepped in, she was efficient, polite, and didn't ask why I was removing my beneficiaries. She simply adjusted her glasses, clicked her pen, and said, You're sure? And I nodded. Yes, I said. I'm sure. We redrafted the will. Every dollar, every asset, every brick and book and piece of land I had earned through the slow grind of solitude and survival, I redirected it. Away from David. Away from Nina. Away from Rose. It wasn't spite. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes not in anger, but in the steady silence of being left out one too many times. I had once imagined this cottage passing to them like a sacred heirloom rose playing on the same floors David once crawled across. Laughter soaked into wood. But you don't leave something sacred to people who've forgotten to knock. So I willed the house to a local foundation for girls aging out of foster care. I gave the rest to a scholarship fund for women over 50 returning to college. The irony made me smile, me, who never finished a degree, now making way for women who had been told they were too old to start again. As I signed the last page, I felt something loosen in my chest, like a button coming undone after being pulled too tight for too long. I left the office and walked straight to the real estate agency. I used the spare key to let the agent into the cottage while David and Nina were away for the weekend. I watched her snap photos of the kitchen I had remodeled by hand, the porch I had stained one warm August morning while David read a novel with his head in my lap. It's got great bones, the agent said. Feels loved. I nodded but didn't answer. Because yes, it had been loved, and now it would belong to someone else who might actually see the warmth beneath the surface. When I got home, I opened Nina's message thread. I didn't reply. I just stared at the last thing she'd sent me, a photo of Gloria holding Rose by the fireplace, captioned, 3 generations strong. I deleted the thread. Then I blocked David's number, one click at a time. Not out of hate, but to preserve what was left of my peace. That evening, I didn't cook dinner. I poured a glass of red wine, sat on the deck wrapped in a shawl, and watched the tide drag light from the shore. No one called, no one came, and for the first time, I didn't wait, I didn't hope. I didn't wonder if they remembered. I just let the quiet fold over me like a blanket stitched from all the years I stayed for them, gave for them, hurt silently beside them. And then finally I exhaled. I didn't take anything from them. I only reclaimed what they never noticed was mine. It was David who called, not out of guilt or warmth, but with that forced calm people use when they're carrying news too heavy to hold alone. She's not doing well, he said, his voice tight, as if the words were trying to slip past a locked jaw. Gloria, the doctors say it's late. I didn't ask late for what I already knew. There was a pause long enough for memory to step in, to remind me of the time Gloria sent Rose a doll from France with a note signed from the only grandma that matters. I had smiled then, said nothing. That was the season of my silence. She wants to talk to you, David added. She asked for you by name. I don't know what startled me more, her request, or the fact that my name hadn't been erased entirely. I waited 3 days before answering. 3 days of cleaning windows that didn't need cleaning, of restacking already perfect linen piles, of rearranging the bookshelf into alphabetical order, then back to color-coded just to give my hands something to do. On the 4th day, I went. The facility smelled like antiseptic and flowers trying too hard to be cheerful. Room 204. The door was open, the curtain drawn halfway to let in just enough light to pretend it wasn't ending. Gloria looked smaller than I remembered. The kind of small that comes not with age but with surrender. Her hair, always so carefully curled, hung limp. Her lipstick was gone. What remained was just a woman, no sparkle, no performance. Just skin and breath and whatever regret hadn't been swallowed yet. She looked up, startled, then softened. Lillian, she said, her voice rough like fabric rubbed raw. You came. I nodded but didn't step closer. She gestured weakly to the chair beside her bed. Please, she whispered. I don't have much time, and I need to say this while I still can. I sat, Not because I needed anything from her, but because something in her eyes wasn't cruel anymore. Just cracked. She stared at the blanket covering her legs. When I left David, all those years ago, I didn't just leave Jeff. I left motherhood. I walked away, thinking I'd circle back, that there'd be time. She laughed then, a hollow sound. But you don't get to put love on layaway. And you picked it up where I dropped it, didn't you? I stayed silent. I watched, she said. Not always closely, but I watched. The pictures, the stories, the way David looked at you in that wedding photo. I hated you for it. Her eyes met mine, watery now, because he was supposed to look at me that way. My throat tightened, but I didn't speak. When I came back, I didn't want to steal him, she continued. Not at first. But then Nina welcomed me like I was this rare artifact. And I thought maybe I could rewrite what I'd erased. I thought if I became part of their life again, maybe David would forget the years I missed. Forget how you carried him. She broke off then, reaching for breath. Her hands gripped the sheet like she was holding onto the edge of something she couldn't name. But I saw the way he still leaned toward you when he wasn't thinking. The way Rose called the herb garden yours. I knew he still remembered. Her voice cracked. And I hated that too. So I did what women like me do. I smiled. I charmed. I rewrote. I helped Nina reshape the story until your name didn't quite fit anymore. I wanted to be the mother again. I didn't care if I had to take your place to do it. The room was quiet except for the soft beep of the machine behind her. She closed her eyes. But you were the one who stayed. You were the one who mothered. I looked at her then, not with anger, not with pity, but with something older than both. Why tell me now? I asked quietly. She opened her eyes, tears slipping into the folds of her skin. Because I don't want to die being remembered for what I took. I want to die having admitted what I lost. The air between us held something sharp, something tender. I wanted to hate her. I did. But I also knew what it cost to speak the truth with a failing body and nothing left to protect. She reached out then, fingertips trembling, and I didn't take her hand. But I didn't move away. Tell him I'm sorry, she said. Not for leaving, but for coming back wrong. I stood. She didn't stop me. As I reached the door, she whispered, You don't have to forgive me. But if there's anything left of me in Rose, tell her the first woman who loved her father finally told the truth. I left without turning back. The hall smelled of bleach and wilted roses. The sun was setting as I stepped outside. For the first time in years, I felt light not because justice had been served, but because the lie had been named aloud. That was enough. I wasn't the replacement. I was the constant, but sometimes, even constants deserve to hear the truth from the mouths that once denied them. I sold the cottage in early spring, just before the wisteria bloomed along the back fence, the same fence David and I once painted white in crooked brushstrokes, laughing when Rose dipped her fingers into the bucket and declared herself an artist. The new owners were a young couple from Montreal, wide-eyed and gentle, full of plans about raising chickens and restoring the attic into a writing loft. I didn't stay long after the paperwork cleared. I handed them the keys, along with a small envelope that held a photo David at 6, in a cardboard crown, holding up a lopsided cake we'd baked together. He used to call this place a kingdom, I said softly. They smiled, not understanding. That's all right. It didn't belong to me anymore. I left with only what I needed: my books, a teapot with a chipped rim, and the silence I had finally made peace with. I rented a small storefront in town, 1 block from the old train station, where the wind carried the smell of iron and maple and time passing without fanfare. I named the place Harbor Light, not because it was clever, but because that's what the cottage had once been to me, a flicker of warmth when everything else had gone cold. The tea shelves went up first. Then the mismatched tables I found in secondhand shops, each with their own past. I filled the windows with books, real ones, creased spines, cracked covers, margins scribbled by strangers. People wandered in slowly, drawn by the smell of cinnamon in old pages, by the way the lighting hit just right at 4 in the afternoon. No one asked about David. No one called me housekeeper. Here, I was just Lillian, the woman who poured tea like secrets and remembered your name even when you forgot your own. The first cat showed up a week after I opened, skinny, cautious, with one ear bent like a question. I named her Fig, then came 3 more. They curled around the bookshelves, slept in sun patches on the floor, and blinked at customers like they were evaluating character. People began leaving food at the back door. Some stayed to talk. One woman cried into her chamomile, telling me about a daughter who no longer called. I nodded and handed her a tissue. "I know," was all I said. I didn't need to say more. One evening, close to closing, the bell above the door chimed and in walked David, holding Rose by the hand. He looked thinner, softer around the edges. Life had etched itself deeper into his face. Rose let go of his hand and wandered to the window, petting a sleeping cat. He cleared his throat. "I heard about the shop," he said. "You made it beautiful." I nodded. "Thank you." He glanced around, eyes catching on the dried flower bundles, the framed page of poetry near the register, the shelf of children's books in the corner. "Mom," he started, but his voice cracked, so he paused, exhaled. "I never said I was sorry. I didn't move." "I know," I said. Another pause. "Gloria,